hard up at 5. So ask questions, and Michelle will for sure give you her contact information. So if you want to cue the dialogue, she's very good about doing that. But for those of you that are on and those of you that are going to join us in the recording, welcome to American National Cattle Women webinar series. Today we're going to be talking with Michelle Payne from Cause Matters. She's going to be talking about communicating agriculture. And for you that aren't familiar with Michelle, pay attention because you're going to see her name a lot. And she does a lot of workshops and speaking engagements at some of the major commodity events. She's a published author, so in the past she wrote No More Food Fights, a great book. That's how I connected with her. And just 2 weeks ago, her second book, 25 Food Truths, came out. And for those of you that are watching live, you have an opportunity to win one of two books. So I will, at the end of the session, and then send you one of those books. So she'll share a little bit more about herself, but a great advocate for agriculture and does a whole job helping people to better connect with our consumers on some of the issues in that, how to communicate those. So, Michelle, I'll turn it over to you and keep going.
Great, Jenny, and I'm excited to be with everyone today, and this is designed to be as interactive as possible. You can make a webinar because I really miss seeing people's faces. Really, my work centers around being able to connect food and farm and bringing people together at the center of the plate, which is kind of the background of the first book, and the broken peace sign is really about being able to connect people so that they can understand perspectives on the different side of the plate. So hopefully the first slide came up, and just by way of background, this is a John Maxwell quote. I'm sure that if you read John Maxwell, he's a great leadership author. You have seen his definition of leadership, is that leadership is influence. And in my mind, there's a lot of opportunity to really step back and consider who's influencing the conversation around Farm and Food Day. So I'm just curious, for those of you that are on, who do you think is influencing the conversation when it comes to the beef business, when it comes to all of agriculture? Where you can talk, by the way.
Blog Babe.
Okay. Other talks?
Unmute, so you can unmute yourself too.
I asked the question is because I kind of like to gauge where people are at as far as whether you think agriculture is leading the conversation or whether you think others like Food Babe and so forth are leading the conversation. So if you have any thoughts for them out there, otherwise we'll keep moving. I think when you look over the last 10 years or so, that we have had a lot of challenges with the image of food and farm and the connection between the two of those. And my hope is that there's images on the screen. Can you all see Oprah and Pink Slime and some of the great friends of the beef business there? Okay, I'm glad that slide came up. So when you consider leadership as influence and you consider influence around the farm and the food conversation, there's no question whatsoever that we have lots of folks that do not understand farming and ranching today. They certainly don't understand the beef business. They don't understand the dairy business. They don't know what it's like to put a plant in the ground. From Michael Pollan and Food Inc. and Omnivore's Dilemma all the way through some of the pink slime issues and what we saw there to Dr. Oz, to some of our activist friends. I think you all recognize the images that are on the screen and you understand the influence that they are having. But I always put this up there because I think it's just as a backdraft as to why this is the best business practice in 2017. The reality is that we live in a population where only 1.5% of us are on a farm or ranch today. Some studies show that 75% of people have not been on a farm in the last 5 years, and 2/3 of the United States population lives in cities or suburbia. So it's really challenging, I think, for us to help people understand the conversation when we're in the distinct minority. And I don't know about all of you, but the agricultural audiences that I've worked with typically tend to be very modest, quite independent, a little bit stubborn perhaps, and we're taught that we shouldn't talk about what we do, and we're worried about our land and our animals, so we're out there taking care of those. All of that adds up to a real opportunity to perhaps change the direction of the conversation by doing a better job of communicating more effectively. And that is particularly true in today's social media age, where we have had seen increasing influence by activist organizations. I've actually been researching this since the end of 2008, but the numbers are up there since January of 2009. And you can certainly see that there's been a great deal of influence from groups such as the Humane Society that's had over 100-fold growth on Twitter since January of 2009. And you can see that they have nearly 3 million followers on Facebook, all the way through to folks like Sierra Club that are real active in my home state of Michigan. The fact that they've had a 75-fold growth just in the last 2 years since Instagram started, and all the way through to PETA and Greenpeace that have seen dramatic growth on Facebook, too. I remember the numbers because this is the reason I have been engaged in social media since the early days. It's really about being able to influence the conversation and to get on the agriculture choir. So I'm going to leave those numbers up there, but I do want to remind people that if you have questions, go ahead and post them. Jenny's going to stop me and let me know because I'm happy to take questions throughout. I would prefer this be more of a conversation than me just talking at you for 45 minutes. So do post a question or raise your hand or let us know if you have one because I'm happy to take those. We look at the opportunities that are on your screen here. I think that agriculture really has the distinct challenge to be able to bring what we do by way of food production to many more people. Whether it would be taking a picture of your cows and calves out on pasture, whether it would be taking, I just saw that Whitney Klasna in Montana actually posted a picture of a Baldy with Easter with the Easter bunny ears on yesterday. It was hysterical. But we have lots of opportunities to connect with people that we normally would not connect with through social media. So I just wanted to offer these numbers up here because I think they're quite motivating as to why that's critically important. And look at the issues that are out there as far as the opportunities to communicate with non-farm folks. There's no shortage of issues, whether it would be animal welfare, and people not understanding why we do the things that we do, such as castration, such as in my part of the business, dehorning, all the way through hormones and being equipped to be able to talk about implants and the sustainability opportunities there, to being able to talk about antibiotics from both a resistant and a residual standpoint, to GMOs, to food safety, to be able to protect the cost of food, to chemicals in food, and so forth and so on. When I wrote my second book, Food Truths from Farm to Table, there was no question that these were some pretty contentious issues. And when you look at really where people have the questions today in your business, they revolve a great deal around animal welfare, hormones, antibiotics. Those first three are really critical. But also there's an opportunity to talk about sustainability. There's an opportunity to talk about protein intake, nutrition, being able to maintain a lower cost of food, and so forth and so on. So the intent of the webinar is to give you some tools, if you will, a plan to be able to put to work about how to help people feel good about where their food comes from. I use this quote in a lot of my presentations because I happen to believe that it's so critical, and I sum it up like this. Learn that people will forget the perfect bite that you were trained to give, maybe by NCDA or Angus or whomever it is that you've worked with. I've learned that people will forget exactly how you farm or ranch. but people will never, ever forget the way that you make them feel. And we like to use all sorts of jargon, science, and data, and as I often say, we puke data on people's shoes. What we really need to perhaps do is to change our tactics and to help people feel good about their food. Because when you think back to the earlier slide where I had all of the images up there around who's been leading the conversation, those are images that appeal to people's hearts. They draw emotions. And while I understand that science and research is critical to the business of agriculture, it absolutely does not work effectively when you're talking to Susie Q consumer. And one of the best tips that I can offer to you is to, when you're having a conversation, is to always go back to the feelings factor, the emotions factor. And I know that's really difficult for a lot of folks out there. Again, I would encourage you to watch what some of the other organizations are doing that are perhaps on the activist side of the plate, and they're very, very effective at it. So, any questions before we get into the 6 steps? Then we're going to keep rocking and rolling. These are the 6 steps that I actually cover on the farm side of No More Food Fights, which is a 2-sided book. That's the first book I wrote, and these are the 6 steps I've used in a lot of my training as far as being able to really be able to build a foundation action plan of effectively connecting with people. If you've ever taken a journalism class, you'll recognize them as the foundation of building a story. It's the who, the what, why, where, when, and how. And when you look at specifically who you can communicate more effectively, whether it's about beef, whether it's about agriculture, whether it's about GMOs or dairy, quite frankly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're communicating and we're targeting specific folks that need to learn about agriculture. So it's about being able to break down specifically who you can connect with most effectively personally. So there's different ways to look at it. One is organizationally, and the second is personally. I'm going to approach everything from today's webinar from a personal standpoint, and if you all can apply it to an organizational standpoint. So first is really being able to figure out who it is that you love working with. I understand that a number of you work in classrooms, whether it would be elementary or high school, and that's wonderful. So we need people that are targeting the media. We need others that are targeting elected officials. We need others that are targeting mommy bloggers and others that are really focused in on dietitians. Because when you specifically have identified who your target audience is, you can figure out what excites them. Call this values. I call it hot buttons. It's what really gets them going. Hot buttons can be positive or negative. But it's really about being able to relate to their passion and some things that get people excited. A fun analogy that I often use, I don't know how many of you are part of the land grant system, but I went to the first land grant university that I happen to think is the best university, and that's Michigan State. So I go on and on about the Big Ten and the fact that we have the best basketball program and that we are the pioneer land grant and so forth. And it's a fun way because it gets people going, both positive and negative, about something that excites them. Not necessarily related to food or agriculture, but it does absolutely get people's attention. And that's really what we're trying to do, is not to speak our language, but to speak their language. They may seem unrelated to agriculture and farming, but in fact, they're critically important. So when you think about some of the target audiences that you can effectively, with messages about cattle and about beef and farming and ranching, and their hot buttons were, or are rather, give me ideas. Who target audience that you have worked really well with in the past, or that you would to learn more about, and then are some of their hot buttons?
Well, you guys have good examples. I work a lot with those retailers, and obviously keeping prices down would be hot buttons for them. Keeping people in the store is even more important to them.
Look at examples. How about, have any of you worked in classrooms with some of the younger students or with high schoolers?
I think you're talking, but you may on mute on your end.
I've worked with elementary school through high school, and I try to equate what I'm sharing with some of their real-life experiences. I was in the classroom a couple of weeks ago and making the point that don't always take very effectively. And I said, for example, I see a number of spit wads up on this classroom sitting, and your teacher brought it to my attention because you had a substitute. And I said, sometimes we need to talk about why we do these things. And the same in agriculture. You might see something represented in an editorial, etc. But what really is the person or the author saying, and why is he or she saying it, and the answer. So I taught for 39 years, high school primarily to your seniors. So I try to bring it to them. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great example, and you know, I think that provides a good example too of some of the communication challenges that we have across the generations, because different generations have different hot buttons. I was just in a classroom actually at noon today talking to a group of FFA kids, and there was a huge difference between the sophomores and the seniors. And the teacher said it's because the sophomores were part of the group that always got the participation trophy, and seniors weren't. And she had seen a lot of difference in the work they can, the advocacy. So, any other examples? Has anybody worked with any dietitians? Well, at iTarget, I'm actually giving a webinar to a large group, and the second book, Food Truths from Farm to Table, was accredited for registered dietitian continuing education credits because they are such a critical influencer group. And my research shows, and working with them shows, that they're very interested in evidence-based or science types of recommendations. They wish more people understood what they did, and that ancillary claims. So are hot buttons that sound familiar to anyone else out there?
I bet it would be very similar to what Jeannie experiences. She says she works with 4-Hers and the public coming through. So a wide range of knowledge and deal with credibility from other point of view.
Yeah, exactly. And I think working with dietitians is interesting because that is the one target audience that you absolutely can connect with them on very similar hot buttons as far as your own, because I do like science and data. So often when people start asking questions about, well, do you pump your animals full of hormones? Are you being cruel to your animals? Or why are they all piled on top of each other? The reality is that we have a tendency to come back with so much science and data that people kind of feel like they've been bombarded. And this hot button piece really is an essential part of your action plan to be able to step back, understand what your target audience is specifically interested in, and connecting with them there. Because this conversation is about them and interest. It is not about you and your interest. And so I think that's a difficult concept for many people to grasp. And it has to do with being able to leverage those hot buttons, which gets to why. Why does agriculture matter? Why does the beef business matter? Why do we farm the way that we do? It's about being able to position it from a hot button standpoint. To give you an example, animal care is obviously a huge hot button. In Food Truths from Farm to Table, when I was looking for stories to translate the science around animal care, I would go to examples that the general public, or as I like to call them, Susie Q consumer, can relate to. And the examples that I use is we have two great Pyrenees dogs. I'm in the middle of west central Indiana. I have beautiful registered Holsteins running around my front yard, and I have two registered Pyrenees dogs that are out there to be able to protect my cattle. They're about 125 pounds, and if you remember the blizzard that hit the Midwest a couple of years ago, there were messages all over Facebook about how you have to get your pets out of the cold, how it's so important to put them in the right shelter and so forth. And I'd gone out, made sure my cattle had extra hay. I'd protected the water to be sure it wasn't going to freeze, and figured the dogs could fend for themselves. So I kept seeing all of these messages on the news and across social media. You have to take better care of your pets. I was feeling really guilty. I went out there. It was about 30-mile-an-hour wind. It was a negative wind chill. It was snowing and sleeting and doing all sorts of nasty stuff. And I walked out to the pasture with the intention of bringing the Pyrenees into the barn. And they were out there playing. Great Pyrenees were bred in the mountains of France. They're bred for cold weather. They love it. The colder, the better. The windier, the better. It makes them happy. They go play. And I use that as an example of animal care is all about context. When you look at some of the practices that we use today, they seem incredibly cruel. However, most people can relate to companion animals. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. There's doggy dating services. There's kitty portrait sittings. And when you can take stories and relate to the hot buttons that people have, such as pets, that sometimes you can get a little bit further. About, again, being able to connect with them with their language and relate to them on their terms. So talk about antibiotics real quick. Is it true that antibiotics are indeed used in the beef business?
Yes.
Yeah. And is there anything wrong with that?
Not as we follow withdrawal, and I think we need to be conscious of the antibiotics that are used for both people and livestock, and use them sparingly and use under veterinarians' direction.
I agree with all of those statements. So when you look at antibiotics, clearly a contention today, whether you're beef, dairy, hog, or poultry, really animal agriculture, it's a critical issue. And so when you consider antibiotics, I think it's important that you understand the difference between residues and resistance. When we start talking about withdrawal time, the consumer does not know what a withdrawal time is. They don't understand that we read a label, that we are required to treat our animals according to a label, and that we withdraw them from any food type of processing for that stated label time. So being able to just have a conversation of, hey, yeah, I do treat my animals. In my case, they're cattle. And I talk about if you've ever been a breastfeeding mother with mastitis, it's an extraordinarily unpleasant experience. If you have a 60-pound udder, it's an even more unpleasant experience. And most women can relate to that. And I flat out tell them, I think it's really cruel to not treat my animals. And when we do, this is how we do it. And by the way, the milk is pulled out, and it is specifically withheld for this number of days. And then it's tested before it goes back in. So sometimes just being able to have a conversation, regardless of what type of animal agriculture you're in, about how we do it, and more importantly, why we do it, and how it can relate to the target audience's hot buttons are very different. Because I would never have that conversation, for example, with an elementary school classroom, not the way that I just explained it, or even a high school classroom, but with a group of moms, I absolutely would. For kids, I would probably relate it to the standpoint of, you know how you feel when you're really sick and how awful it is, and your mom takes you to the doctor, and then you get better? Well, the same thing is true for my calf that's out in the barn. Because then you're relating it to their terms and being able to connect on their hot buttons. So that makes sense, and if you have any questions, by all means, please do let us know. But if there was one thing that I encourage you all to do is to consider how to take your own shoes off and put Susie Q consumers' shoes on, or whomever your target audience is. talking to legislators, they have different hot buttons. Media clearly have different hot buttons. It's that specificity, if you will, about being able to identify who you're working with and what's important to them and what excites them. If I could get all of agriculture to do one thing, it probably would be this, and it would be to be proactive. And I understand that we're worried about our land and our animals first and foremost. I understand that's where our priorities are, and I also understand that we can be incredibly defensive. When we have the opportunity to have conversations, for example, to talk about animal welfare when there's no nasty video out there, to have a discussion around hormones and the fact that, yes, you do use implants, and the reason why you use them is it allows to have a more efficient animal that grows quicker and is more sustainable. To be able to have some quick types of conversations on a proactive basis so that we can change the reference point of what people know around where their food comes from. Because if we choose to wait and other folks define the issue for us, as we have in the past, and choose to wait until the Humane Society shows a feedlot or PETA shows a feedlot and cattle are piled on top of each other because they're trying to keep the flies off their back, and we've never had a conversation with consumers, then we probably shouldn't complain. What I try to ask people to do is to create a question mark in the minds of consumers in the minds of your target audience, to create enough of a question mark so that when the next outrageous claim is made, for example, beef causes cancer, that you know have enough of a question mark in their mind to say, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. I know Jenny, I know Jeannie, I remember this conversation we had. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to ask a question about that. That to me. Again, when we have folks that are asking questions, then we have the opportunity to be have that conversation and to be able to really get through to them about what the truth is around what's happening on farms and ranches today. So answer number 4 is all about an investment in your future, in my opinion. It's being able to proactively protect your choice of farm and ranching as you best see fit. Just having that choice defined for you. A number of case studies from gestation stalls in the hog business to hen housing to RBST in the dairy business to GMO labeling on the crop and vegetable and produce side, that I think we perhaps have enough of an understanding of this that choices around how we farm and ranch are being removed from us. So it's a point where we have to be proactive if we want to be able to protect those choices. So think about how you can spend 15 minutes a day doing this. There's a lot of different ways to do it. It can be through casual conversation. It can be through social media. It can be through a formal classroom presentation. It can be through media outreach. There's any number of ways of doing it. Inviting people to your farm or ranch is a great way to do it. So you consider the opportunities that there are as far as where you can do it. Oops, sorry, my slides are getting ahead of me here. Apparently I pressed too many of them. There's a lot of different places to be able to think about this as a global cause, but acting locally. So I put up some different examples here. It's actually from Instagram. Down at Tennessee Beef does a great job with some of the social media, and I just pulled them not to show Tennessee any favoritism, of course, but just as a quick example of sometimes you can just grab a picture on your smartphone and you can put it on Instagram, which is a virtual platform that's mobile-based, and it's a quick way to be able to share with people. The bottom left, I actually had the opportunity to interview a rancher out in Montana just last week. We talked about cat care, we talked about antibiotics, we talked about how he raises a healthy steak, including foot rot and so forth, live on his ranch from Montana. And then we showed people the scenery because, of course, it's so beautiful. That video in less than a week has 2,000 views on it. And based on the commentary that has come in from some of those, getting that real live perspective from farmers and ranchers directly is so valuable to people. So I And you can see different examples. If you know Debbie Lyons-Blythe, she does a great job across social media, whether it's blogging or Twitter. Brian Scott is another Indiana farmer who's a friend. He blogs at The Farmer's Life. He shares his GMO contract, and you can see he's been a part of the CNE Democracy blog. And he does a great job with outreach. Obviously, opportunities for you to bring people to your farm, to be able to explain biosecurity to them, to go to media, and so forth. So, like I said, lots of different ways to reach out. It's just determining where best fits you. So the last step is really being able to commit to the plan, a plan that's proactive, a plan that's passionate, that taps into your passion and connects with other people's passion, a plan that helps you empower not only yourself but others. I know that you all probably have a lot of concerns about how much beef has on the plate these days, and if you want to change that, I would encourage you to perhaps consider a plan where you can more effectively have a conversation with people. So get questions ready because we have we have a few minutes for questions here. Just to recap real quick, it's about being able to know who your target audience is. That's answering the who. Understanding what their hot button is, which is the what. Being able to leverage that hot button and answer the why does agriculture matter, and spending 15 minutes a day proactively, thinking big picture but acting locally as far as the where, and really being able to commit to the plan. Offer these 6 pieces because they're easy to remember. The reality is that the most important element in all of this is you. It's your opportunity to lead the conversation. So I think one of the opportunities that we have in agriculture is to consider how our influence is. And if we're not leading the conversation, then what can we do to change that? Because certainly our future depends on it, whether you're in the beef business or whether you're planting soybeans. The reality is that this conversation needs to be changed, and we have to be able to get people to connect at head and heart, farm and food. Verb is what I usually use as some of my closing comments because I think it's appropriate to what we do. If you want 1 year of prosperity, you can grow grain, especially when we had $8 corn. If you want a decade of prosperity, you can grow almonds if you're out in California or peaches if you're in Georgia. But if you want a lifetime of prosperity, it's about growing people. And so many times we think that we're about cattle, we think we're about corn, we think that we're about cantaloupe. But the reality is agriculture is absolutely about a people business, about being able to grow people, their understanding of food, and also their understanding of why we do what we do in agriculture. I will stop there, and we can have a hopefully lively discussion with questions and whatnot, and invite you all to connect with me across social media. I am at MPayne Speaker across nearly all the channels. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's not on there. And Food Truths from Farm to Table, I think Amazon has finally caught up with the shipping. It is available there or at your library or bookstore or whatnot. So, Jenny, do we have a bunch of questions?
Anybody have questions before I jump in? Let me get over to chat. I'm forgetting about that. Okay. Since you did brief through this, can you give a few more examples on some of the buttons for those that might not be wanting to talk about the big ten? What are other things that to help start connecting with the audience that they choose to engage with?
So in my research for Food Truths from Farm to Table, I sat down with quite a few moms and talked to them. And we're typically well-to-do moms. Obviously, I used research data from all subsets. But when I sat down and talked with them, typically their concerns were around the major issues that I have mentioned, from hormones to antibiotics to animal welfare to sustainability. But the one thing that kept coming back to me is that consumers, and this does not matter necessarily whether male or female, feel like they need a science degree when they go to the grocery store. It's about their food, and the one that is predominantly female, I'm sure this will be shocking to everyone, is that they feel guilty about their food. The hot button really is guilt, and it's time, and it's also feeling like they're doing the right thing. Because what parent does not want to buy the right food for their family, right? And so that was one of the major hot buttons among kids, and I will say this would be more of a K through 6 example of hot buttons. They want what's fun, they want what's cool. They also, some kids are concerned about being challenged. Other kids are concerned about games. There's a lot of different ways that you can go there. But as you all know, obviously, if you want to get into school systems, teachers are the real target audience because you have to be able to get through to the teachers and the administrators. So standards are typically a huge hot button. Convenience, so if you have a curriculum or a presentation that they can easily fit in. So, for example, one of the things that I did when my daughter was in 3rd grade, at the suggestion of a person in the beef business in Nebraska, we actually had them Skype in with a farm once a month. And so the farmer would come on and talk about what's happening on the farm, and then they would have the opportunity to ask questions. So it was convenient for the teacher, and it was fun for the kids because it leveraged one of their big hot buttons, which was technology. So different examples of hot buttons.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's always the things that we forget about is jump with what we say and forget to tie it back to what they were just talking about, or because we want to get in our little sound bite rather than actually keeping it as a conversation and tying it back to what everyday life is.
Yep.
All right.
I thought we'd have all sorts of questions going on.
Well, while you were thinking about questions, I will go ahead and tell who won the book, so I your addresses to ship them to you. So the first, and just randomly created a spreadsheet on Excel, and wherever your name falls on my sheet is how you get it. So, Danelle, you are one of the winners, so if you will send me, and I'll write my email address up in a minute. Whoever is caller number 6, call-in user number 6, you right now, whoever, you were winners, and let me count again. 1, 2, 3. Jeannie, you are the last one. Get me your I will send you a book.
This is Wanda. One thing I found that, where you guys were talking about talking to public and personal, I found like when I'm talking to moms and I say, well, when your child is really sick, you take it to the doctor and they need a vaccination or get medicine, or if you go, like for children can go to school, they have to have a vaccination. And I say, well, before children can go to a lot where there's a whole bunch of other cats, they have vaccination so they don't get sick or they don't spread a disease to the other cats. And, I explain that to children, and I'm talking to like 4th graders and 3. That really relate to that. And as you said, that is an easy way. You got to change what our animals as a personal action we do for ourselves. And they understand and comprehend it a whole lot better.
Yeah, it's a great example, and I think that really gets to one of the things that I have found through the course of my career is that if we can explain to people why we do what we do, a huge difference, because the light bulbs start going on. For example, I realize most of you probably have to deal with dehorning, but I do have to deal with dehorning, and we do so to keep my son and my daughter safe and our animals safe. And you start explaining the why around that, same with castration. Why castrate animals? And from a safety standpoint, when you can explain that to folks, the light bulbs, as I said, start going off.
That is really, yeah. Go ahead. My 7-year-old granddaughter wants to know why we can't keep both the boys and the girls. And nation, if you have to get rid of the seed sack, stand in it. And then she'll tell her friends, well, Grandma has to get rid of the seed sack because we can't have babies. She's home and then she was just having me born Saturday, and she was asking, well, why do you got to do that? So you explain to them and understand that it's for the safety of everybody else, but they do understand a whole lot better.
Yeah, I think it's we don't understand, or we don't trust what we don't understand. If we're living in a society where the majority of folks have never been on a farm or ranch and we're not talking about it, how can we expect them to trust it? So it really is on us to have the conversation about why. I appreciate that example. That's a good one. And hopefully this has given you some tips today to be able to have a more effective conversation. By all means, I welcome you to email me, connect with me across social media, and we can continue talking about this. But hopefully it gave you a little bit of a background. And Jen, thanks for having me. And let me know if you have any other questions.
Yeah. So then for those of you who jumped on after the introductions, Ms. Payne was our speaker. She is an author. She has done a tremendous amount of advocating for agriculture. Familiar with the Ag Chat and Food Chat. She was the founder of those platforms, and then around the country doing. I'm going to mute them. Does keep speaking and workshops to dive in deeper into these 6 truths as well as other workshops. As a reminder, in May, our speaker will be Leah Beyer. So this time we talked about making sure that you are proactive and that you have some key steps on knowing how to go and reach your target or the audience that you want to be reaching. And then next month, Leah Beyer will talk about making sure that you're not silly as you go do some of these things. So key tips on making sure that you need to keep your mouth shut and making sure you're sharing without distorting the truth, lying, other things. So be sure to watch our new blog, so ancw.org/beefmoose. It will be in your e-news, and it will probably also be shared on ANCW page and other social sites. So thanks for joining us today, and we will try to have those posted with the recordings. And I didn't get her email address, but you can get her on your social media. So have a great afternoon, and we will check you at the next ANCW webinar series. Thanks.